Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the You Don't Look Like an Engineer podcast.
Today we have a guest that we're really excited to talk with. I met Dave in the Women in Engineering Committee for Queensland.
Allegedly.
Yeah, actually, he doesn't remember that was the case. But it's okay. We'll just say, we'll go with my memory. We'll trust my memory. The thing that I guess caught my attention about Dave was not just his amazing energy and mindset, but also his view on these topics that we're so passionate about. So we invited him today. Dave, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and just a bit of your background.
Well, thanks. It's lovely to be here, and thanks for that introduction. It was very generous. I'm excited to be here on your podcast. Laura, you and I have spoken quite often, and so on. We haven't met previous, but we've had a little bit of a chat before the recording, and it's been really nice to talk to you. So I've got about 25 years experience in industry. I can see by someone's face there that he is surprised, but that's okay. I see that a lot. So I'm Australian born and bred, half Chinese. I have 3 wonderful girls and obviously a wife. So in some respects, the way that my passion for this topic around DEI has also a sort of self-fulfilling element that I have a lot of females in my life, and I think that there's great opportunity for them, and it needs people like me to help make it the case. So it's sort of been... That's how it's turned out to be. It's not how it started out, but it's sort of serendipitous that it's ended up that way. I like to sort of be pretty active. I like to be involved with up-and-coming people in the industry to try and help share some of the knowledge that I've got through the years. I'm a chemical engineer by sort of degree. I've worked in oil and gas and mining. I also have a business degree and leadership certificates. So these days, after coming through in a heavy engineering field, a lot in mining and oil and gas, I've decided to move my career over to people development. So now I do predominantly executive leadership coaching, proponent for DEI, and I sort of help people achieve better outcomes than they think would be possible. And so I try and find that potential in people, and then I try and build it. And it's really wonderful to be able to do that and to share my experience and to make industry better. And that's me.
Wow. Genuinely, everything that you said was inspiring, and it was your introduction, so I can't wait for this episode.
And so many questions come to mind just based off what you've said already. But I guess the first thing, if I can ask, is if you could go back to, younger David and what his interests were. What do you think made you so passionate about STEM?
Well, that's really interesting. So the beginning of my career, I think for most people who become interested in STEM, they also have an interest in science and technology and sort of how the world works. And for me, that's the same thing. In fact, a funny story about how my career started is that I was interested in how the world works, and I was very good at chemistry and quite good at maths and science and that sort of thing. I actually had decided that I would either be a chemical engineer or a food technologist, because I'm very passionate about cooking and health and food and stuff. And I got accepted into engineering, and the rest is history. But for me, engineering was sort of that secret world, how things really, really work. And you'd be surprised how many people, well, maybe not you two, because I understand you're both in the field as well, but a lot of people drift through life not really caring or having an understanding about really what goes on and why things work. Like, you'd be surprised how many people who don't know why traffic lights change colour.
Wow.
Right? So there's a lot about the world that people have no interest in, and they just accept it for what it is. And for me, that's never been enough. It's always been that there's more that you could find out, and with that knowledge, you can make things better and you can make improvements. And so for me, STEM is the gateway to sort of unlocking all of that hidden potential. And so that's what inspired me to get in the industry. I was fortunate that my dad is an engineer, so I also had reasonably good visibility into what that meant. And I think we might talk about it later, actually, but that idea that if you can see things, if someone says you're going to be a doctor or an engineer and you can't see what that is, it's theoretical. But if you can see examples of what that results in, then it kind of gives you optionality. And so for me, I was very fortunate that my dad is an engineer, and so I could see where that led him from a career perspective and what that meant in a working perspective rather than just academic perspective. So young David, being good at maths and science, sort of saw the world as being this place that if you knew more, you could do more. And engineering was sort of a result of that.
Curiosity.
Sorry.
Yeah. One of your values, I can tell straight away. And have you always been this way? Was this something that you just inherited?
I think it's something that I've always had. I think I inherited it from my parents, because there's always this question of why. I think if you really focus on the why, it just opens doorways to understanding why does this work this way? Why is that has to be the case? And you can see how, for me, whatever I look at, that's a really important question, because if you understand it, you then have the opportunity to change it. And so it's difficult to make changes that would result in successful outcomes without really understanding. So understanding is, in my case, I believe understanding is the key to unlocking that. So that natural curiosity of just not accepting things at face value and being more interested in what's really going on and why does it have to be that way. Sometimes there's good reason, and sometimes it's just, you guys would have come across it where people go, that's just the way it is. And engineering is fundamentally not accepting of that. And for me, that's great, because I think that inquiring part of, getting smart people around a problem is that very few people accept the status quo. So for me, that curiosity is sort of the keys. People, if you have the curiosity and you're willing to ask, but what it also did for me is that you find out that if you're willing to ask and willing to acknowledge that you don't know, there are people that do know and they're willing to share it. And so that leads you to getting great mentors, because you're not afraid to go and knock on someone's door and say, hey, you seem to know a lot about this stuff and I don't. Now, I could read as many books as I wanted, but you've probably read them and distilled them into something quite great. So how about you just help me? And that's been one of the keys to progressing through, to basically finding people who know stuff. And you've got to be willing to go and say that you don't know, for people to then be able to offer you what they know. So it's that curiosity thing is a really powerful thing.
A little bit of a segue, because I know this is not generally what the podcast is about, but I'm so curious, just because, you said you had Asian parents, and the not quite intuitive to think that they would foster like the asking why sort of thing, because most ethnic parents are usually like, just this is how it is, accept it sort of thing, not really encouraging too much curiosity. And I know that was a point of contention growing up for me a lot. It's like I always wanted to know why, and Mom was like, can't you just accept some things are the way that they are?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. And to be fair, like it's a challenge, right? Different cultures view this differently. So I'm half Chinese. So my dad is Caucasian and my mum is Chinese, and my mum is second generation Chinese. So she grew up in what was a predominantly Caucasian Australia, and a lot of her education was through the church. So she does have a little bit of this diligent, hard work. You work with what you've got. And that's a very, and this may offend some of your listeners, but that's a very Chinese perspective. And I'm going to say Chinese, I'm going to expand it to Asian perspective of you work hard within the constraints you've got, and that's it, hard work. And my dad was the first in his family to get a tertiary qualification. So he was more of the putting himself through school, working, got a degree, but did a lot of hands-on stuff on the way through. And I think a lot of that idea of if you know, you can change, you can improve. So I've kind of got the two sides, that hard work, diligent. I haven't spoken to Laura about it, but perhaps, Farhan, you've got that sort of Asian-ish upbringing where it's a lot of extracurricular stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Piano, singing, whatever comes along, you're going to do that as well. Lots of extracurricular stuff, and that's hard work, and Saturdays are not for leisure. So I'm not saying that that's you, but that is pretty stereotypical for Asian families. And I have that edge of, everything that you're offered, you should do, and sleep when you're not doing those things, but otherwise do all these things. And my dad's knowledge and curiosity around how the world works, how can we make it better? Don't settle for the status quo, have impact, make change, ask questions. They probably regret the fact that they made me ask a lot of questions, because of course they were the recipient of most of those questions, but that's sort of where it came from.
No, thank you for answering that. But yeah, that is A lot of the times, I think that is the cultural difference at the end of the day within workplaces. And we do hear it often that people from different cultures are not used to, being as maybe assertive or questioning, and that can impact careers. So at the end of the day, that's sort of why I think it's a bit relevant.
We can talk a lot about that topic, actually. It's a big area of study at the moment too, around migrant engineers.
David, you've just signed up for a part 2. Thank you.
So there are, I think,
just getting to it right now.
There are lots of things to talk about. So you guys would know. So 50% of the people are going to be first generation Australian, right? So when you look at the demographics of the workforce that's coming through, you two are actually probably more representative of what the workforce will look like going forwards than the traditional Caucasian. I'm going to say, if you look at the workforce of 25 years ago and you look at the workforce of 10 years in the future, you're probably more representative. It's going to be a lot more people like me, a lot more halfers, and a lot more people of different ethnicity other than Caucasian coming through. And they're going to be first and second generation. And so you're going to see those cultural differences in work ethic, hierarchy, willingness to contribute. You're going to see all those complexities come through, and they're going to be essentially one of the big challenges for the existing leadership of industry here, because that's quite different from what you're used to. So if you're a person who, like me, has been in the industry for a long time, that's a huge dynamic shift. Like, if suddenly half your workforce is essentially what you previously were classifying as foreign, you now have this entirely different kettle of fish to work with, right? You have the methodologies, the language, the way that you get people to contribute, how you value their input when it's presented in a different way. They're all learning curves for existing leadership and for emerging leadership, right? So I think that's a really interesting, and it's probably a subject for a whole podcast, as to how ethnicity variation is really impacting the Australian labour market, and that's going to change the landscape of engineering and construction, because a lot of those people are going into those fields. So I think we're going to see a lot of that in the future. Definitely
a different way to I don't know how culture in the workplace is going to sort of happen, and even leadership, because everyone has a very different leadership style. And as you guys was saying, a big part of your personality comes from your culture and your background, and there's so many distinctions in that already. So it's going to be interesting. I do want to ask you some other questions about what we were talking about at the beginning. So I might just put a bookmark in here and a potential podcast subject that we have to unpack.
A definite one, because I don't feel as prepared to talk about it now, but I do feel like we opened up a can of worms I wasn't ready for, and I'm like, holy shit.
See, what have you done?
It's a lot of back to the drawing board for leadership at the end of the day, recreating a lot of new styles.
It's learning about psychology as well, and how we all work, and also not just psychology, but cultural. I don't know if anthropology is literally.
Yeah.
So as a reminder for this, so one of the reasons why this is an area of expertise for me, of my 25 years, I've spent about 15 years of it in leadership roles. So if you think about that it's that I started my leadership journey in my mid-20s, right? And that's when you turn up and you literally know nothing.
Which literally looks like 5 years ago, by the way.
You give us a compliment.
Lovely compliment. I'll take that. I'll take as many of those now, because it might all come crashing to a halt soon. Is that so when you start your leadership that early, you genuinely don't know anything. So you can't rely on your technical skills to get you through. You have to rely on your ability to get everyone else to perform well, because you literally don't know anything. So you can't back yourself with your technical knowledge when you've, 3 years out of university. So you really have to collaborate and bring people together and, be really humble about not knowing. And that, combined with the fact that I worked, all throughout Southeast Asia. So I lived in the Philippines for 3 years. I've worked through South America, large design teams with South American projects. I've worked in North America. You get this cultural lens that allows you to be open to developing the methodologies that work for people of different cultures. Now, doing that has prepared me to sort of work nicely in the landscape we're in now, where those people that previously were all overseas, a lot of them are now here in Australia. So the sort of lessons you learned through your career, which in that case was overseas in foreign cultures, has now become like that melting pot here in Australia. So if you turn up and you lead a large design team or you lead a large construction project, you're going to be looking out on a sea of faces who, you know, more than 50% of them are probably going to have a shade of brown. You know, they're not going to be a white, predominantly white workforce anymore. And they're going to be people, as you said, Sahan, who might go home in the evening, speak a different language, have totally different religion and culture, and their understanding of work practices, where their experience is. And that's one out of what could be 1,000-person project. So the huge variability, which is now on our doorstep, is kind of unprecedented. And it's exciting because there's lots of opportunity, but I think it also has a lot of challenges.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the opportunities and the challenges? Maybe just give us a little bit, one challenge and one opportunity. I'm curious to learn more about that.
Well, so let's just look at, say, the opportunity for a diverse workforce. So I think diversity is a great topic. We could talk about diversity, we could talk about equity, we could talk about anything you like. They're all topics that I'm passionate about, and because I'm passionate about them, I've spent a lot of time looking into them. So diversity is wonderful when it's really, I guess, leveraged to a way in which it's useful for both the people who are diverse and for the businesses that have the diversity in them. Diversity for diversity's sake is not particularly useful. In fact, it can be quite damaging because it's this idea that if you chuck random plants in a garden bed and the garden bed's not prepared, they die anyway. So if you've got a culture that's poor and you invite a whole bunch of people in because you want diversity and then you don't have a culture that's suitable, you then sort of actively shove them back out again. And it increases the toxicity of your workplace because you kind of then putting people through an experience that's not very nice. Combined with the fact then that you're creating a culture as you do it, which sort of demonstrates to everyone else that you're not a really inclusive workplace. So it does bad things in all cases. Now, the opportunity is that I'm the only person on this podcast that speaks one language. That's a bit of an assumption for you, Sam, but I know Laura speaks Spanish.
She speaks more languages than I can.
So diversity is good because diversity of culture, so there's, I guess, such a complex topic. So let's just break diversity up a little bit to make it easy. Diversity, like different people from different cultures that speak a different language, blah, 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 blah. Diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of experience. So there's like diversity that you can see, and there's diversity that you can't. There's diversity that you can hear, and there's diversity that you can't hear.
Like disabilities. I love that.
Like different abilities. And I did an entire keynote on that for someone. It's that the diversity you can't see is very powerful. And the problem with it is that it's difficult to tap into because you have to get past certain cultural boundaries to get there. So if you grow up or if you start your career or your early career has been spent in a high power hierarchy environment, such as South America or Southeast Asia, you can have all the best ideas in the world and you won't share them. And potentially in your native culture, you're not encouraged to share them. And then when you arrive in Australia where there's a flat hierarchy, it just doesn't make sense to you to talk up in a meeting. Whereas everyone else who grew up in Australia just throws their opinion on the table and there's no real respect for the hierarchy. So you've got this great diversity and those people won't contribute, not because they don't really have anything to contribute, but because they're not really welcomed. Culturally, where they come from, it was never the done thing. Yet you've got this person who might have the exact answer to the problem that you need, but how on earth do you get to it? They're not willing to share it. You don't have the tools to encourage them to because you've never dealt with it before. You know, you can't just call that person out in a meeting in front of 25 other people and say, hey, what's your good idea? Because it doesn't work, right? So the challenge is that, well, how do you embrace that diversity and how do you leverage it to its maximum benefit for both the people and the organization when you may not have any experience in working with it, and that person feels uncomfortable because they've come from a culture where that's not the done thing. So it's like having something that you really, really want, but it's inside a safe, and you can't get to it with the tools you've got. So I find that often, especially when we talk in the sort of diversity space and we go across the whole spectrum, there's lots of both real barriers and perceived barriers to tapping into that opportunity. And so you might have the best diversity in the world sitting at the table, and they might never contribute to the outcome. So the outcome is not improved markedly by having them, and you've probably done them a disservice by not creating an environment where their input is welcome. So huge opportunity, but the challenges that it introduces are quite high as well.
What do you think is like, you said that the word to perceive. Can you say that again? A perceive...
Barriers.
Barrier, sorry.
So there's
What
real
do you
barriers. Real barriers are simple. Like, I'll just speak plainly, and if we need to edit it, we can. Laura, your English is wonderful, right? Like, and I don't know how long it's been good for, but it probably didn't start out good, right? You probably speak Spanish better than your English, and through some process, your English is now as good as it needs to be for you to be successful in an English-speaking country. I'll put that as a caveat. But if it wasn't, then that's actually a true barrier. Your inability to communicate is a true barrier. I wrote an article on this called I'm Smarter in My Own Language. And that's a real, it's on LinkedIn, because that's something that immigrants really struggle with. You might have the smartest person in the room, and if they can't take what they're thinking in their native language and translate it into the language of communication in the place they're currently at, it's a huge, real barrier. It's not a perceived barrier, it's an actual barrier. And so you need to put real things in place to fix that. I've worked on projects with a bunch of translators. Things like Google Translate, which has come along in the recent years, has helped a little bit. But to be honest, if Laura, you were the smartest engineer ever, but you had really poor English and I don't speak Spanish, that's a real barrier. And when you do big international projects, that's something that is a real barrier that you really need to address. And you need to do what I classify as, you need to do like 110+% to fix it. Because as it boils down, that effectiveness dilutes. And so you lose the collaboration because people feel uncomfortable communicating in the language is not theirs. They avoid it. The lower you get down in a hierarchy, it tends to become more siloed around language. And you might see that as you come through industry. So that's a real barrier. Perceived barriers are things where it's more, the barrier is real because perception is real, but it's a perceived barrier. So it's not real like language. Language is a real barrier. It's really difficult. There's not that many ways to address it. It's sort of a mechanical thing. It's a communication thing you need to fix. The inclusiveness, the welcomeness, the belonging, that's a real barrier, but it's a perceived barrier, because that's one of those things where the person doesn't feel comfortable. Even if their input is welcome, they might not feel that. Now, that becomes a real barrier because it's perceived, but it's not real in the same way that language is real, because language is a mechanical, real thing. The other one is something you can flex around. It's a resultant of the relationship where you sort of say, well, perhaps the leader doesn't have the tools to create the environment they need, and perhaps that person is not familiar working in this environment, and the truth is in the middle. Because I firmly believe that if you're part of the problem, then you're part of the solution. So because an ecosystem is intrinsically combined, it requires both parties to move in a certain way to create a new equilibrium. And so that's the sort of thing where, well, they're always welcome to contribute. Okay, so you say that. They don't feel that. So for them, they don't feel welcome. But they are welcome. Yeah, but you saying they're welcome doesn't make them feel welcome. So you both have to move to reach that new understanding. And they're the barriers that I think are much harder to find. The language one is kind of easy. Religion's kind of easy. Those sorts of sense of belonging, sense of inclusion, I think they're more difficult to find, and they're much more difficult to address because they're not black and white. Can't just get a translator in.
I also think that these, I guess, barriers that you can't really see are a lot to do with where people are at in their personal journey, or like in their personal, when they know the sense of self, or like their self-perception. And because these things, I guess I'm gonna just say develop, or you like come up with them from a very young age, it's really difficult to tackle each case. Like, it's very individual dependent. So yeah, I'm interested to actually see how leaders would deal with that, because in diversity, and this is a great segue to all the questions that we have for you tonight.
Oh yeah, you have questions. We haven't got to the questions yet. Excellent.
Yeah, I feel like women do face certain issues in, like, feeling confident, or not feeling confident, but like coming across as confident, or they have to prove themselves a little bit more. And that's like what we have. That's sort of like the perspective we have in the industry. So it definitely we need to challenge that. But to ask you, I'm curious to know, because you mentioned in your introduction at the start that you were passionate about diversity and inclusion because you have a wife and daughters. And I found that really beautiful, because there's so many people in the industry that have a wife and daughters, but still don't understand diversity and inclusion and are not interested to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. In fact, they are like, nah, don't have time for that. What was it that make you be interested in reality? What clicked?
Well, I guess just unpick a little bit, is that it's worked out that I was interested in this, I guess, before my family came along, and my family has now become, it's probably reinforced. There's a greater sense of purpose around it. So it's sort of moved it from being interest to like impetus. Like, we can do better here. And if I can contribute to that, then I'm creating a better world for my family. I'm creating a better world for females in general. And so I think it's more that it's a big challenge, and it's multifaceted. And like lots of big challenges that are multifaceted, people often ignore them because they're too big to tackle. And they look at it as being, that is a problem, but I've got other problems to solve. And they're easier, less complex, and I can win. In DEI, my personal perspective is that you can't win. There's no win. It's not a zero-sum game. You don't win. You make progress along a continuum, and some of them are very hard yards and some of them are not. But there is no golden ticket at the end. You don't get a trophy. And if you do get a trophy, you're probably doing it wrong. And there's a whole topic we can talk about. Because the trophy that says you've achieved something, you're probably achieving something that's not really on the true journey anyway. And so it's one of those things that you're on the treadmill and you're just going to be on it forever. And that's not palatable for many people, to work in a field where you kind of can't actually ever finish the work because there's an improvement.
Sorry, if I can add to that thought. I think a lot of it is because it is still, as much as we like to say it's changing, it is still a predominantly male-dominated society, workplace and industry. And I think it becomes, to add a layer of complexity, that you are constantly running on the treadmill, but you're running for someone else. Like, it makes little to no direct impact to your trajectory, your graph, your whole career plan. It's adding to, but it doesn't impact, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. You're right. It's an externality. So there is an entire school of thought around that, Solon. So this idea that your externalities don't impact you. It's like your carbon footprint.
Exactly. And it's so wrong in a way. Like, in most ways, actually, it's generally just wrong. Really sorry to offend whoever. But unfortunately, that's the majority of people's thought process, is that not my problem, and not even that they think it's not their problem. I think until you're faced with it in your immediate circle, it doesn't really hit home what the issue is. It's like COVID when it was happening and people were going around doing their own thing. But unfortunately, until someone didn't have a family member who was so sick needing oxygen, it didn't really hit like what's happening. It's just sort of like that. It's not malicious. The intent is not bad, but the it just happens. It's human nature, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's not like, so I like to think that for all the things that I'm interested in, my approach to them is I need to understand both sides of the argument to be able to argue either side. And so, and it's a sort of I don't like to feel strongly aligned with my understanding of my opinion unless I understand the other one, because then you're just biased. So I think the reason why it's hard is because the status quo is not so bad. Society works okay. We live in an OECD country. The quality of life is fine. The standard of living is okay. Life expectancy is good. We don't have overpopulation, blah, 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 blah. And there's this thing that affects women, which I'm not, and I have a wife. She's not unhappy, and so life goes on, right? So it's not that bad. Now, as you said, it's not that bad unless you're the victim of it. And saying victim makes it sound a lot more horrible. And I know that's not appropriate, so you're not a victim of society, but it is that it's kind of, if you're going to work and you're working hard and you're being successful, when the numbers look good and people are patting you on the back, there's a little bit of like, why change this? It's working for me. And
and looks to be working generally as well. Like,
seems to be working okay. The AXS is loving us. I'm getting my pay increases and my bonuses, and I do a little bit on the side because I'm kind of told that I have to, and that's what I do. So it's sort of that for a lot of people, the status quo is not that bad. And so as an externality, you have to be actively interested because, as you know, if it doesn't directly affect you, then it's kind of hard to get motivated to do anything about it, which is, as you said, Salman, it's like, for the vast majority of people who are in industry and are doing quite well financially and are being successful in their careers, it doesn't have a huge impact on any of those things. Now, that's a really interesting psychological area to get into because you can make people do things in different ways. You can make it impact them. And you can see how people are trying to do that. The law has been changed to suit. The reporting requirements have been changed to suit. People's performance metrics have been changed to suit. But is that stick or is that carrot? Well, that's stick. So, when you're trying to influence behaviours, there's multiple ways to do it. Legislating it, creating rules and policies is stick. So, again, what motivates people to make change? And that's probably another topic for a different podcast.
And that's actually really interesting that you're talking about that, because that's what we can tell in a lot of like organizations, they're like just trying to tick boxes, and there's a whole I guess collateral after that one. And unfortunately people become that collateral as well, families, and it's really sad to see that. But
yeah, so I think that's the challenge. I don't think either of you have kids.
Not yet.
It's so I have as you know, Laura, and so you might not know, I have a 2.5-week-old. So I have a very new addition to my family.
You still look like you sleep really well.
Yeah.
Do you have a mask on?
Feeling tight on the inside, let me tell you. So, and you start to understand, and I think what I bring to the leadership space and what I do in my coaching and mentoring is that there's, at the real basic level, there's you can give the stick or the carrot. And of course, that's that analogy of how do you make a donkey move? You whack them with a stick or you hang a carrot in front of them, right? And what I think happens, what you've seen, is that if you boil that down to you have to report it, it's a KPI, you have to achieve it, that's kind of stick mentality, which leads to a lot of bare minimum compliance. And if you try and fix problems through compliance, you end up setting the minimum possible standard, which means doing just enough to not get hit with a stick. That doesn't really get you very far. That gets you the minimum amount of effort to reach compliance, and in most cases leads people to try and figure out how they can do less and still meet compliance.
Yeah, and that happens in environmental, that happens in societal, that happens everywhere, which is really sad.
You can see how apt it is to this topic is that you can see how society in general, using this approach, creates this compliant, minimum possible effort scenario. And it does drive change. But even as you're seeing in environmental policy and as you're seeing in the diversity space, it moves at a snail's pace. And that's sort of like, that's the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you create all this legislation to make people do it, not because they want to, but because they have to, then people do the minimum. And that's the problem.
You have such a good understanding of human psychology and what makes, people tick or organizations move or not move or, at a snail's pace or whatever. But it's so curious because usually people can end up, being like, it's too difficult. I'm not going to get into it. But you love it. You like, catering, finding people's skills and, honing them. What made you fall in love with that side of things? The people side of things.
To a degree, like it's going to sound a bit cliche, but it's sort of like people like yourselves, right? There's so much potential and there's wonderful people out there who have the opportunity, well, they don't have the opportunity yet, but they have the ability and the skills to make a real impact and have an impact on their own lives and livelihood and the people around them, but also have an impact on the world and society in general. And wouldn't it be a shame not to lean into that and help those people reach sort of what they can have as their peak performance, but also, peak wellness and enjoy life and all this sort of stuff. And I think for me, because I've spent so many years in leadership roles, starting out in management roles and then realizing that management roles are not actually very good compared to leadership roles, is that people are having a good time, people who try new things, people who aren't afraid to fail, they're more innovative, they take risks that are quantified, you get better outcomes. And so early on, it was this understanding of trying to do the minimum amount of management and the maximum amount of leadership to allow people to perform at their optimal, to find, to add their value, to find their edge, rather than mandate what had to be done. And so I have this saying, which is manage things and lead people. And for me, that's become sort of tantamount to success. Provide the minimum framework of management so that people sort of understand what they need to be doing, but then give them free rein and lead them in the direction that it allows you to get these good outcomes. So the more I worked in this space and the more I had exposure to people like yourselves, to wonderful international engineering teams, which are more diverse than local engineering teams, you guys might have seen that in your experience, is that then you work hard to create an environment where people do speak up and they do say things that are insightful and interesting, and you're like, wow, you had all this value that was kind of locked away, and now just by creating the right environment, it was untapped, and now it's all here, and we all have this wonderful solution. Or you've contributed to the culture of the group, and it turns out that you're a really lovely person, but you were just a bit shy. And so when you see lots of this stuff, you realize that that's where I should be paying my attention, is tapping into this and making people feel welcome and valued and wanting to, add value, share their good ideas, share their experiences, and in some cases, share their culture and understand how their diversity has shaped their world. And once you start realizing that that's all just in front of you, and you could either do something with it or you could walk away, why wouldn't you want to do something with it? It's just an amazing opportunity. And because I've been fortunate through my career to have the opportunities to work in the space, it's allowed me to really play with it and develop skills, but also understanding and enjoyment. And that's how it's become sort of the area that I work in.
And so you got into, management and leadership pretty early on in your career. Was that sort of a natural progression of how things were going? Like you did some technical work, you got into management, and then you saw, okay, I can manage people and I'm sort of good at, the leadership side of things? Or was it more you were already interested in, making, like, letting people feel comfortable, letting them come out? And do you remember very early on, like, someone or something that happened and you were like, I could do this leadership thing?
Or maybe you just step on it and you were like, oh, where? There we go. I have to do this now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting area because, there's this idea between nature and nurture, and some people are born leaders, or there's two theories: people are born or built. So growing up, and not professionally but socially. So growing up, if you were to go through all of the things I've done pre-career, I did do a lot of those sorts of things. So things like I was school captain, or I was captain of the sports team, and class captain and form captain. So there's these natural things that you do in the formative years. And to be fair, I think that's a really interesting place to look at, because we often go, so what's your experience? And, for young people like yourselves, that's not many years. But actually, you've been built in the decade before that. So what makes you who you are when you're 23 is not the 4 years of education. It's more like all of that stuff that happened before. And so I had a lot of that stuff, which made me comfortable. Like in terms of speaking, I was a school captain, which meant I had to get up in front of the whole school every Wednesday and talk to the whole school every Wednesday. Wasn't fun to begin with, but once you do it every week, you eventually get good at it and get comfortable at it. And so I had a lot of those things. Then I always sort of pictured myself as being less in the detail and more sort of heading towards management, when you sort of try and map out your career. So I actually have a business degree as well. So I have a business management degree. So I did an engineering degree and a business management degree. So I
love that, by the way. For anyone listening, I really do.
So I have a Bachelor of Business Management in International Marketing, I think, if I remember correctly. And so I already had this version that I was picturing where I would move into management roles. And so when you have that concept, you kind of look for opportunities that would result in that. And I guess you jump at opportunities that maybe you're not qualified for, but you have faith that you'll make it work. And that was probably how I managed to progress so quickly through my 20s, is there's a lot of yes, followed by I'll figure it out, versus tell me all about it and I'll decide if I can do it. Well, the other option is you go, sure, how bad could it be? And off you go. And surprisingly, it usually works out. And I think in your career, that's usually how it works. There's not that many, depending on how many people you talk to, there's not that many unmitigated disasters. You don't want to be the person who's signing off on a structural thing you don't understand. But otherwise, there's not too many things that can't be fixed with a, whoops, I'm sorry, and what do you think? I'm only 25. How was I supposed to know? And so you kind of make your way through it. And so I had this trajectory. In my late 20s, I realized I'd probably pigeoned myself too much into management without enough technical skills. So I switched careers back to technical. And then as nature sort of has it, you find your way back to those sort of leadership roles and you get pulled back into them. And that became the rest of my career, engineering management, executive engineering, that sort of stuff. So it was something that I'd pre-seen. But I think the real trick is that before my career started, I tried my hand at a lot of team leader, leadership things, project leader, group work, all that sort of stuff, naturally wanting to get outcomes out of it. And you get a bit of a cadence so that then when opportunities arise, it seems like you're going to be okay. And that gives people confidence. So there is a little bit of pre-career, plus I did a management degree, plus I think I did a post the other day that says, aim for the gap, shoot for the gap. If you see a sliver of an opportunity, just go, hey, I'd have a go at that. And you might just be the only person who put your hand up and they have no option but to say yes.
Very proactive and I guess main character energy. That's what our Gen Z would call it. Having a go at Gen Z. I'm pretty sure we are. But anyway.
And lots of delusion because they love it. Delusion.
Yeah, delusion. I am intrigued because I think this is from our conversations. Perhaps Sohan isn't really across it, but you've mentioned a few things to me when we discuss about, you facing ageism and even racism. And the way you talk and the way you lead is completely different from someone that, has a victim mentality, as we were talking about earlier. And I'm really intrigued to know what was sort of like the the personal attributes that, or yeah, the mindset sort of like approach that took you to move on from those experiences that you had that were difficult? Because I'm sure that a lot of the listeners must have or might have gone through things like that. So I guess what I'm asking is a piece of advice for these people that go through these things and want to get to a set position, but they don't really know how because they are going through the storm. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So unfortunately, the way I look at it is that really comes down to sometimes it's a make or break situation. And to be fair, it's going to test you. And I fundamentally believe that it's hard to build resilience without building resilience. It's hard to develop grit without developing grit. You can't just go, I'm naturally resilient, have grit, never been tested, but I'm sure I have it. You develop it when you have to, right? So to develop emotional resilience and to develop grit and to develop that work ethic that means you get back up every time, you do have to be tested. And it's really unpopular. I see it a lot, and it's going to sound like I'm very old and I'm sorry, but I see it a lot with newer generations, is that there is a bit of this protectionist of treat them gently, don't offend people. But I don't think humans are built that way. I think the reality is that you go to the gym, you work out, it's hard work, you get stronger. You don't go to the gym, it's not hard work, you don't get stronger. So resilience and grit in some ways, I tend to think of it like a muscle. You develop it because you have to. So, ageism, racism, just being different, just being different. Like different is enough to create problems when you're a kid. You don't really have to have that much going on to just be different, and that's enough. No one needs to understand your difference. They just need to be able to identify it. And that's enough to put you outside the circle. And it's not necessarily intentional. Like a lot of this stuff happens, I'm not going to say innocently, but happens unintentionally. A lot of the exclusionary behaviours are just unintentional, just because that's how they grew up. That's how they know the world. And remember I was saying you both have to move? You can't say, you're going to go get the chair, give it to me, pull it out, let me sit on it. Like, hey, if there's a space and there's a chair, maybe I should get the chair and come and sit in the space. Like, you have to work together. And so a lot of the stuff that people say, it's against them. It's not really against them. It's just because that person doesn't know better. So if you approach it that way, there's an opportunity. Well, they're a very nice person. It's not their fault that they grew up that way. Maybe I can help them understand. So for me, what's most interesting is that for me, that's just how it was. Like as a person growing up in Australia, that is just how hard it is. No one's coming to make it easier. No one's saying it's good or bad. It's that the hill is steep and you have to run up it, and the hill is steep and you run up it, or you stop. No one comes and says, I'm going to make the hill flatter. Right? No one's going to say, I'm going to give you legs. So when you grow up, it's what's in front of you and you just deal with it. And that develops this resilience of like, I'll have a crack. What's the worst that can happen? Right? Or, so I was in a meeting, and I'll tell you a little story. So I was in a meeting, it was an executive meeting, and it should have been one of those things where everyone plays nice, but they don't, because they don't. That's just how the game is. And a new exec had joined, and afterwards he pulled me aside. He's like, how did you deal with all that stuff? And I said, like, what stuff? He's like, the stuff they say that's inappropriate, and they make fun of your height, and they make fun of, you having slanty eyes. And you say, doesn't affect me? Because I have a choice as to what I let affect me or not. So why would I let someone else dictate how I feel about something? I feel fine. It's got nothing to do with me that they don't have the education or the knowledge to know that that's unacceptable. I can point it out to them. How does it make me feel? It doesn't make me feel any different to how I felt when I walked in, because it's my choice as to how I feel about things. And that's something where you do build resilience, because maybe the first time someone said it, it was kind of like offensive. This time, probably not. It gives me motivation to change it because I know not everyone's going to have that ability, and I don't think people should have to deal with it. But having dealt with it, I know what it's like, and you can come through it fine. And, to be successful, I still think you have to deal with that, because the world's not going to change overnight. And so that is the world. and you have to sometimes deal with how the world is rather than how you prefer it to be. And so for me, I have this background of experience in this area that's led to the grit and the resilience and the knowledge of how it can be so insidious and how it can be sort of underhanded and how it can be built into language and built into systems and processes and all that sort of stuff. And so there's heaps of opportunity to improve it. Just takes someone to sort of like poke around with a bit of intent to change things to make a meaningful difference. And for me, that's sort of how I've dealt with it over the years. And so I see it, I acknowledge it, maybe it doesn't affect me, but I also think, well, there's an improvement here. You know, we could change something here and it would be better. And that's that whole question of why and how things work and why does it do that? And why do you feel like it
all comes back to your curiosity? But like you said, the world doesn't change unless people like yourself are, you know, actively trying to make a difference and do things like your little pet project that we didn't really get to talk about too much, but refine and hone. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have my own business. I work independently. I left corporate before the birth of my 2-year-old daughter and took some time off. And I'd left with a curiosity of why couldn't I make more of a difference with what I was doing? And now that's sort of that curiosity. Like, you do something, you're like, that should have worked. You know, I think that should have done something. You know, I instigated a lot of changes. Some were very successful and some just didn't work. Like, confoundedly didn't work. Like, that should have made a difference and didn't. And so I actually went and studied. I went and did some study in the space. So I have a qualification from Northwestern leading diversity, equity, inclusion, because it's like, why doesn't that work? And what was most interesting about that is that because most of us are infatuated with symptoms rather than problems. And if you let that sink in for a little bit and think about a few scenarios, you may agree with me that we tend to be infatuated with symptoms rather than the actual problem, right? And so a lot of the stuff is like Band-Aids. And so I often say, as long as you keep taking your Panadol with whiskey, you're still going to wake up with a headache. And so if you take the Panadol for your headache and you keep taking it with that whiskey, you're still going to have a headache when you wake up. And it won't matter how many Panadols. If you keep taking your Panadol with whiskey, you're going to wake up with a headache. And so I think for me, that's why I decided to leave corporate. And I had a successful corporate career. I had a successful career. I enjoyed, all the things that come with it. But I didn't feel like I could have the impact I wanted in the confines of that corporate environment and the single corporate entity, because you sort of have these competing needs. Mm-hmm. And now I get to work with people that I really enjoy working with. I get to talk to people like yourself and find people who want to make a change and work with them to help them make that change. I use my experience and sort of the way that I do things and the knowledge I have and experience I have, it enhances and complements their own abilities to allow them to make more leveraged impact. So I work predominantly with sort of C-suite general managers, MDs, to sort of enhance their understanding in this space to allow them to make more impactful change. And by doing that at that level, you impact multiple organizations in multiple fields. And that leverages my knowledge in a way that I think will bring greater change to the industry than working within one business.
Absolutely. If you if you're tackling the C-suites, tackling the C-suites, that's definitely going to bring change, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are actually making the decisions. And if they don't really know how to lead, and if they don't understand diversity and inclusion, as well as we have talked about it at the start of this podcast, it's really hard for them to see what is a barrier and a perceived barrier.
Yeah.
So,
and the other half of my business is working with people like yourself, because I'm very pragmatic, and most engineers are high critical thinking, pragmatic sort of people. So in the DEI space, it's very easy to sort of wax lyrical about how the world could be a better place and, the challenges are huge and, let's have purple cupcakes and talk about it. But the reality is that you guys are dealing with the world as it is today, and for the next 10 years. And if you're going to be successful, it's not going to be fun all the time. And that sucks. But to have you guys, and I say guys, and I know that's a bit gendered, but I'm sure you'll forgive me.
I actually researched that. I Googled it up and it's like gender neutral, so don't worry.
Excellent. So in a gender neutral way, if we aspire to have people like you in leadership roles, then you can't wait for the industry to get better by itself. So I have a really pragmatic approach too, which is like, just do something about it today. Just, so if someone says something that you don't think is appropriate and you feel up to it, call them out. And if you don't feel up to it, then find someone who's like me, who's an advocate, and ask them to help you call it out. Or drop a note to HR, like, be empowered, because industry is tough. And it's not tough like it used to be tough, but it's still not tough. And when I came through, I dealt with it a lot. I dealt with it in my own differences that I have, not a gendered way that you guys might come across. But if I was waiting for someone to fix it for me, I wouldn't be where I am now. And so the other part of my business is taking people like yourself and saying, the world is your oyster. Like, as long as you understand the rules of this game, you can still win. It might seem like the odds are stacked against you, but trust me, we can beat this thing, and you can be the director of whatever you want. You can be the C or the G or whatever you aspire to be. But if you don't play by the rules of the current game and you're waiting for someone to change the rules, it's not going to happen. If you're going to be leaders of the industry, you still have to climb the rickety old ladder that's there and deal with the fact that you're going to take a few knocks and notch them up to like experience that build your resilience and grit, because you're going to be one of the people who reshape the industry, and you kind of have to get to the top to do that. And so I work with people like yourselves to help them really understand how it works, to deal with those hard knocks, to help them build a bit of resilience, how to address those things. So in my coaching and mentoring part of the business, I look for people like yourselves who are keen and interested and probably have enough resilience to deal with the fact that there'll be, some unpleasantness about it. But it takes those sorts of people to make change.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about your business and about the knowledge you have in diversity and inclusion, because I find it fascinating, all of these things that we really don't come across every day. You see difference in thinking, you see difference in ethnicity, but you don't really understand the challenges of leading teams that are so different. And, we all want to be successful in our life, and we don't really know how to get there. And speaking with people like you and getting guidance from people that have gone through the hard times, I think is definitely a way to, pave your way to there.
And I do have to add that we had read this on your LinkedIn as a review or something someone had left for you, saying that your energy and your approach and positivity is actually infectious. And I do have to agree.
It's good because you also keep it real, and I like that. I like that about our all the times that we've caught up. I think the empowerment that you give people, because there's it's your responsibility, and it shouldn't feel scary. It should feel empowering. You can change it. So I really appreciate that.
It's true, because if you want to be a leader of tomorrow, that's kind of what it takes to be a leader. You have to get in the mess and help clean it up, because it's easy to get, like you said, run when everything's flat, but that's not exactly leadership at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David.
Thanks so much, Dave. Have a good rest of your night.
Thanks, you too. See you later. Bye.
Bye.